and you can see that signs right there. Are we ready to start?
Are we?
Yes.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Synapsis for this discussion on homelessness. We are very privileged to have a great panel today for you to interact with and hear from, to speak about the subject. And to introduce myself, I am Solomon Berta. I am the owner of Eureka Books here in Eureka, California. That is an applause line. And also, this topic is very personal to me also because when I first moved here in 1993, I got involved with a group called Food on Bombs, and we were serving food in the hungry on the streets of REDHEADED, and of course, soon after got sued by the so-called liberal city council at the time, threatened with jail time for providing mutual aid to my neighbors. So, thanks for that. It really did galvanize me and help me have a perspective on what needs to happen, which is something more than just what we have been doing. As we can see, it still continues to be a problem. So, enough about that. We've got a really great, fantastic panel here today, so I'm going to introduce all of them and then hand off to Brian. So, on my left there, Leslie Castellano, of course, is the owner of Synapsis here and is on the City Council of City of Eureka. Leslie has been active in working on homeless issues for as long as I've known her, which is very long. Someone I just met here is Weather, and he's a local community activist doing mutual aid work with AHHA and even out of camps where he has resided, providing a great example of how people can take the power to solve problems in our community with each other. Okay. And then to my left immediately is Nezzie Wade, the co-founder of AHHA, which is Affordable Homeless Housing Alternatives here in Eureka. If you're here, you probably know that Nezzie is legendary.
Yeah, yes, he is.
Going from the right side, then we also have Ryan Houston, who is an independent freelance journalist. Hudson. Works with REDHEADED BLACKBELT, came on, and others, and you've seen the work that Ryan has been doing on this topic for a while now. Next to Ryan is Monte who's a co-founder of the Wood Street Commons. Wood Street Commons is a collective of unhoused activists who work together to provide the same mutual aid and to find a way out of this problem. And we're very happy that he's here with us. And then to my immediate right is the author, the filmmaker, and author of Front Street, Brian Barth. I was very happy when Brian actually stopped by the bookstore and talked about his upcoming book and talked about how we could have an event, and we kind of got connected with Leslie and we were able to bring it all together. So I feel like I'm surrounded by superstars up here. These guys are all just going to do some amazing work with you. And Brian will kind of break down what's going to be happening with the rest of the evening. So thank you all for coming. Oh, and let me say, I have books in the back. Brian's book, which is called Front Street, Resistance and Rebirth in the 10 Cities of Techlandia. I am going to resist very hard to rant about this. And instead just say, come buy a book. And special today, with tax, it comes to about $32, but tonight, if you have $30, I will sell it to you for that.
Gotta work on your pitching skills.
So, thanks so much for coming. Come chat with me at the book table, and come see the other fine folks who are tabling on the right who've been doing the work in our community to address the situation. But right now, I'll turn it over to Brian who will tell you about the rest of the evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Solomon. Thanks for being the sort of first person to sign up for this event. It's come together so beautifully in part of the last minute. and with all of you, all of these beautiful faces. You guys are part of it, and we're going to talk a little bit up here first, but this is largely about us all talking together, not us talking at you. So thank you for coming and participating. So I was a journalist, am still a journalist, and I was covering Silicon Valley quite a bit for a few years back in the late 2010s. And it's very loud. And people were urging me, write a book. Like I was covering the companies, right, and all the scandals, social issues related to the tech industry, and I was like, I don't want to write a book about that stuff. It's just I'm burnt on it, But why don't I write a book about the ordinary people of Silicon Valley, like the cooks and the nannies and the landscapers and the people working on the tech campuses, doing that kind of thing, and write about Silicon Valley from their perspective. And I knew that housing would be part of that story because it couldn't not be. It's the most expensive housing market in the country, and the people doing those jobs they're not making enough money to rent there, obviously. And but I had lived in California for a long time, and I had been back east for a long time, and I came back here to start working on this book project and installed myself in Cupertino, the heart of Silicon Valley, as they call it. And literally the first day, I had heard about this camp next to the Apple headquarters. This you may have seen pictures, or maybe you've seen it in person. This giant UFO spaceship-looking building, $5 billion building. I think it was the most expensive building on the planet when it was built. And I heard there was a camp basically next door to it, and being a journalist, I was like, that sounds like a story. And I was just up the street, so I walked over there, and I had never been in encampment before in my life. I never really interacted with unhoused folks. And I didn't know what to expect, to be honest. But what I've experienced changed the course of my life and became the subject of this book. And was something so profound and so moving just on a human level. And so clearly a story that was not being told in the media. Literally from the first moment I walked in there, all of my ideas about what homelessness were sort of obliterated. And what I saw was really like an intentional community, a group of people living together with more or less common values, working towards a more or less common goal. And I really related to that. I had lived in intentional communities, and I was like, these are my people. And so, but that's not the story you hear in the media, of course, like at all. You hear two words, two phrases: drug addiction and mental health. And you hear them over and over and over and over and over. And so this book is really telling what I believe is the rest of the story that the general public has not been exposed to, because the average person does not go hanging out in homeless camps. And I found there are kind of three really compelling narratives that I wanted to share in the book. And the first one was like, these people have something of value actually for the rest of us. Like there's a sort of hard-earned wisdom that comes that could not come from that experience, right? Because it's an experience that tests the core of your being survive it, it's like a rebirth process. You know, people are reborn into wise and radiant human beings through that experience, and have wisdom to share. And one area of wisdom and knowledge that they have is what to do about homelessness.
Exactly.
And so that was certainly not a narrative that I was hearing in the media, and that policymakers were talking about. I mean, we do have like policymakers who talk about lived experience, and they have like the token lived experience person on the board of directors and all that, and that's great. But to really listen deeply to those communities, like about what they want, what they need, what their dreams are. We don't necessarily ask those questions. We're like, just put your name on this piece of paper, and go get in line for the institutional thing. But I think, the story of homelessness is so much more rich and interesting than that. And so that was kind of the starting point of this book, is like there's this disconnect between the sort of policy environment around homelessness and the media narrative around homelessness and the reality of homelessness. Like, just a profound disconnect. And everyone's asking the question, like, well, we're spending so much money, in California, billions and billions of dollars trying to fix this thing, and it seems to be getting worse. And why is that, And so, one of the first things that was just glaringly apparent was the sort of the front line of policy in relationship to the unhoused person's experience is the experience of being swept, of being forcibly removed from their home that they create on the street. And so that's like the primary kind of relationship that many unhoused people have with their local governments, is this extremely antagonistic relationship. And so there's not a lot of trust. There's not a basis for like good communication and a healthy relationship between local governments and unhoused communities for that reason. And I think that has a lot to do with why the problem remains so intractable. And actually, I take that word back. Not the problem, but the situation. So kind of, point one of the book is, why are we doing that? Why are we repeatedly inflicting trauma on individuals and communities who have experienced so much trauma, and essentially like pushing them down the ladder? Like we're demanding that they pull themselves up by the bootstraps while we're sort of pushing them down. Like, if you can imagine, bulldozers rolling up to your house at 7 in the morning and knocking on your door and saying you got 30 minutes to get out before we throw all your belongings into a dump truck and smash down your house by bulldozers. That's what it is, that like you can't put, that's just the reality. So that's point one, and point two is what happens in these camps, in my experience, and I spent time in many camps, and I focus on 3 in particular in the book that I found particularly compelling. But like I said, they're intentional communities, and people come together perhaps out of necessity to begin with. But like, we're human beings, right? So bonds and relationships form, and people start building things. They create the infrastructure that they need to fulfill their daily needs, food and shelter and water. Like they get together, they figure out how to make it happen, and then there's the social infrastructure and these incredibly powerful bonds. If you're sharing such an experience like that with a group of people, you know, it's just like, you can imagine what that does, right? Like it's very powerful. And so that in itself is a wisdom that unhoused communities have to share is the power of the interdependent community, you know, the resource sharing community. And so naturally, one thing that those communities do is they come together to resist being swept because they don't, you know, it's like they're like, stop that, you know, like quit. And in a group, they have a little bit more, you know, voice, right? And so, you know, they stage protests, they, you know, contact city council, they contact the media, they do everything they can. And one thing about the sweeps is it tends to kind of undermine that community cohesion, right? Because people then get spread out. And so the communities that last the longest in one place, they tend to, they really grow into a village. But, you know, when they're repeatedly swept on a monthly basis, let's say, just not the opportunity for that to happen. So one of the communities that I focused on in the book, Wood Street in West Oakland, where I met Monte, who is traveled up here today to be with us. That community existed for a long time. Like, I mean, informally, let's say for a decade, you know, OPD was telling unhoused residents of Oakland, go down to Wood Street, we'll leave you alone. And so over time, just a lot of people ended up down there, and you know, before you knew it, there was 300 people. And you know, over time, they really formed a political kind of outlook on the situation. They really became activists, and they really invited the housed community in, and so it became this blended housed, unhoused community. And you know, that's another big point of the book is when you take away that barrier and you make it a little looser, like who's housed, who's unhoused, like let's not worry so much about it. Like what I saw was the unhoused folks in that community, they really healed and moved forward in their lives through those relationships in a very profound way. And so like if there's a solution out there, to me that's it. And it's very organic and slow and like not, you know, there's not necessarily a formal structure for it, you know, like on Wood Street in Oakland, I mean, this just happened. Nobody was like, hey, like, let's, you know, apply for $1 million grant and like, we're gonna do this and this and this, you know, it was just people, it was just neighbors helping neighbors. And so that was something very powerful. So I'm going to read a short section here about Wood Street to give you a little bit more of an idea, and then show a short video about Wood Street to really bring it to life for you, and then we're going to talk amongst ourselves. Thank you. I met Monte on a July morning at his camp in Oakland, which stretched for a mile along Wood Street and bulged 100 yards back from the curb, beneath a tangle of overpasses known as the MacArthur Maze. It was infamous among California's mega camps, a place news reports referenced Mad Max to describe. Mountains of junk, hard-looking dudes ambling about, and an incredible number of burnt-out cars. A Hollywood rendering of the apocalypse is an apt, if uncreative, means to explain Wood Street's outer appearance. But the news reports miss the seeds of Eden hiding in the dystopia, and the tender hearts residing in the hard-looking dudes. The roughly 300 residents of the camp referred to the place, their home, as Wood Street Commons. I walked through the gates of Wood Street Commons to find a small outdoor stage where Monte sat on a canvas director's chair in a loose-fitting leather jacket, pink shirt, blue tie, and cowboy boots. Gathered around him was an assortment of fellow residents, house friends of the camp, and a handful of city officials who looked rather uncomfortable. Several members in the media were present. A PA sat near the edge of the stage. Soft drinks and snacks were spread on a table as folks lounged about on couches waiting for the event to begin. The stage was backed with walls made from pallets, an IKEA bed frame, and other stylish material. Shade came courtesy of white fabric strung loosely between crooked wooden poles, along with a forest green cafe umbrella with Starbucks printed on it in white letters. I spotted several hypodermic needles on the ground, along with a dead rat. Propped on a table was a board displaying architectural plans that illustrated how the dystopia might be reorganized a bit to reveal the jewels within. The plans showed the locations of individual homesteads as well as community facilities, including a flea market, bike repair shop, office space, and the Moose Pit Cafe, located next to a shed belonging to a resident named Moose. All of this and more already existed, though very informally and largely obscured by the cluttered aesthetics of the place. Meals for 50 plus were prepared daily over a large fire pit. An adjacent pantry stocked dry goods and fresh fruits and vegetables, free for whoever needed them. Donated supplies such as clothes and toiletries were generally available. Solar panels had begun to replace the power cords that pirated energy from nearby streetlights. Communal water tanks, filled by a volunteer with a water truck, had relieved the need to tap illicitly into city supplies. A pair of steel shipping containers provided lockable storage, a critical step to stability, and a place where people were afraid to leave their possessions unattended for fear they would be pilfered. Security cameras and lighting had been installed in some corners of the camp. If a female resident needed an escort back to her place at night, a call went out on the camp's walkie-talkie network. To accommodate their many Zoom calls with the media, NGOs, and government officials, they built an outdoor conference room that included an orange and blue wall of padded fabric that made for a professional-looking video backdrop. The purpose of the event was to convince the city officials, who wanted to tear the camp down, to support the residents in developing the Wood Street Commons vision instead. The city had plans for 170 units of so-called affordable housing on the portion of the camp where we gathered, just a few steps away from Monte's handcrafted home, which had a small putting green in the yard and a mailbox that said 1707 Wood Street out front. 7 units of the city's proposed development were designated for homeless veterans and 6 for young adults exiting foster care. The majority were designated for households making 60 to 120% of Oakland's median income, which translates to an annual salary of roughly $75,000 to $150,000. The city's plan for the camp's residents was to move them into cubicle-like tiny homes inside a fenced lot down the street, where they would be lorded over by security guards and subject to a litany of rules governing their lives. The meeting was facilitated by Leah, a massage therapist who volunteered at the camp and could sometimes be found kneading her elbows into residents' backs. After she laid out the ground rules and time limits for each speaker, Brian Warwick, a housing coordinator with the city, explained that the $100 million development had been held up for 18 months because of the current situation with the site. Latonda Simmons, the assistant city administrator, struck a more conciliatory tone. I want to recognize that everybody is frustrated with the city, she said, and it's one of the reasons that we are here. The residents felt that this and all the shelter options promoted by the city had the same underlying problem. They were based on a way of thinking that did not reflect the values and needs, or even the basic dignity of the people they are designed to shelter. The residents weren't interested in submitting to the city's shelters and their wardens. They viewed this as a downgrade from the current living situation. We're people, right? I mean, we really are, said Monte to the officials. The city's plans for the community felt like being forced into a category that does not fit for us, he continued. This, he said, gesturing at the makeshift village that sprawled out from the stage, is our category. Monte, a veteran, explained to the crowd that he once tried a housing program for unhoused veterans and it nearly killed him. He said the freedom and autonomy of his current living situation were essential to his mental health. I'm claustrophobic, he said. Don't put me in a box. I might hang myself. He was not exaggerating. So,
actually, if you want to share this, feel free to grab some from the side room over there, and then there's also some seating up here and stuff like that. So make yourselves at home.
We'll see you over our heads, or we in the way.
Perfect.
Another homeless city pops up every day and citizens are scared.
It doesn't look like it's in there. There's so much trash, human waste, garbage, and just the stench of it.
Or almost again, it's the coffee shops.
And there's, sweaty people all over the place. It has become so dangerous.
The zombies are taking them.
No one that comes here for no reason. And once they get here, that reason tends to change.
I actively committed to act of trying to kill myself. I was out here to die. But somewhere on that path of destruction that I was on, I found this community. And this community, I found life again.
There's a lot of people out here that will tell you that they've met this thing that has changed them. It's infectious.
One thing is apparent is the love that exists there. Nobody judges you there. Self-heals there. Unconditionally. Anybody can come here. Just that alone is enough to make a person think about bettering themselves. Why would anyone that's out here that has found their spark, why would they want to give that up for something that's less than that spark?
Eviction day is here. The city of Oakland is clearing out the sprawling Wood Street homeless encampment. As expected, police officers were met with resistance to today's sweep.
Fuck that! Get my conversation out of here! When I'm hurt, I get angry. And it's a you guys out here. What is this? What the fuck? We're homeless people. You might have guns.
We've always been the problem.
Fuck this shit. Going to get my weapon.
At this point, it is war. And we need to make the fight large enough that the world is watching.
During these times, it makes you wonder really what life is about.
So, I feel like it's gonna do that again. That's just a little teaser of a feature-length film that I'm trying to put out with you. So, let's turn it over to Ryan Hudson, who is going to lead us in the conversation.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you to our panelists for being here today. So, first, Brian's book, Front Street. It's immersive, it's colorful, it's enlightening, but it's also balanced with a bit of self-reflection. And I think that that's important as we're dealing with this sensitive topic, right? So, it was a great read for me, not because it was a familiar topic, but because the people in the story, can everybody hear okay? I felt like those were familiar characters and people that I've already come to know and have met before, locally. And we're 300 miles from the Bay Area, but the common threads were abundant. So I'm excited for this conversation here locally. Before we open it up, we're going to have some questions for the panel here. And my first one, Brian, I wanted to start with you. So your book is really a rare glimpse into the elements of the human condition. It's not, and my take on it, I think it's fair to say it's fundamentally about community, and not so much about homelessness as a condition. So more about people building something together under impossible circumstances is really how it comes through in the book. So I wanted to start by asking each of our panelists here, what does the concept of community mean to you? And I don't want the textbook explanation, right? I want, if you have a moment that stands out, or if there's something that you saw or felt and you said, this is really what community is, that's what I would like to hear for us to get started. Monte?
What community means to me. I can just tell you that it's like a bowl for me. It's something that holds me, it keeps me, something that I can lean on, I can pick it up and drink it. I was really at the pit of my despair when I met my community. I was there to commit suicide, and I was held up by all the people that were suffering right there with me. So that's what community means to me.
Yeah, meeting Monte and all the different folks, that I met in the journey of writing this book, taught me, what community is, to be honest. Because, when you're living that life with a career and just getting from point A to point B and being in a rush and busy and all that, you don't necessarily know your neighbors, and but in a camp, you definitely know all of your neighbors intimately. And, I realized, for me, that was actually, those folks had something I didn't that was so valuable, immeasurably valuable. And, I think it's very simple. It's just about being present with the people around you as sort of your, having that high in the priorities as opposed to your own success in life, if you want to call it that, climbing the career ladder or whatever, sacrificing one for the other is really self-defeating, and I think can leave you feeling, a little bit empty.
Good question. I like the concept, Monte, of both, because we're all part of this thing we call community. And I really think, for me, it's the relationships and investing in the people. And I appreciate the fact that we have a lot of institutional arrangements that make it possible for us to get the kinds of things we need, like power and water and all that stuff. But I haven't had experience being in camps, and the value of that to me was made really clear as it went in there a lot, and at all times of day and night, and sitting with people. There are things that were really important and fundamental to how they held things together that were important. Being together, and everybody had their jobs and things to do, like we all have our jobs and things to do. But there were the water bearers, there were the cooks, there were mechanics, there were people who did all these different things and pooled their resources, and somebody went shopping and somebody did something else. But when things were needed, they were right. They just happened that way. You know, once lost my phone has my life and everything I do in it. And I retraced all my steps, I did everything I could to try and find my phone. And I was out going over the next day over the same places, and somebody said, "What are you looking for?" And I said, "I lost my phone. My phone is somewhere." They said, "Hold on." I made a couple of calls, and they said, "We got you." And I just go to this motel, go to that door, and then I went there, and they said, "Go here and go there," and got your phone. And they have their backs. And that's, you know, it's however it works. Community is what facilitates, I guess I should say, the relationships that people have, the interrelationships that people have, and the nature of basic concept of interdependence that are familial and essential to the dynamics of community and how community happens. I was called mama, I was called aunt, I was called sister, I was called everything in the world because that's how people feel about you being with them and being in community.
For me, community is, I look at it like this. I look at it as like a lot of things in the world are isolating and about like putting us in groups or putting us as a part of as an individual. Community is how we come together beyond those barriers, beyond those layers of things that keep us apart. It's when we come together and like make decisions together, build things together. It's like, it's the togetherness. That's what community is the unity, the togetherness. It's not isolation. So it's not surprising that a bunch of people that are isolated for different reasons, maybe even from their own families, maybe from resources, from basic needs like shelter, water, you know, it's not uncommon to think that through that isolation they would find a common place to be and like common ways to come together and unify through that isolation. So I feel like, you know, it's a natural thing that we're getting back to, not that it's something that's new or that like is being invented, but we always used to live in tribes and like in communities, like that were very close knit. We ate together, we celebrated together, like our lives were way more intertwined and connected and way more of a community. And like through the detachment and isolation, like we've lost a lot of that. And it's a need that's so ingrained in our like basic psychology, in our like basic needs, like the socialness of we are social animals, like we're not supposed to be isolated. We're not supposed to feel shut off. Those are times of danger. That's when like you can be a danger to yourself in those situations. You don't need anybody else to be dangerous for you not to be able to be dangerous to yourself or to make bad decisions on your own. So I think that it's just the process of us coming together. And it doesn't always look the same way, it doesn't always like appear the same way, it's not gonna always be the same people. Like within a community, there's gonna be sub-communities and subgroups, like that's naturally gonna take place, but it's when we get past the division and come together that we create community.
Soaking in what everyone said, I feel like community is something that I'm often kind of defining and redefining, and it's a learning process for me. I think lately part of being in community is to like feel like with my body, you know, and my thinking, the complexity of different people's needs and struggles, and try to understand as much as I can about that complexity. And then, you know, I'm in a very privileged space in many ways in that I sit in government the rest of this year. And so to, you know, sit with that complexity and try to really think about what can I do, what can I, you know, do it to be in relationship to that in a way that creates the possibility for more freedom and care in our world here in Northern California. You know, I do think that it's a joy and delight to be a human, you know, to be alive, and to, like, I think there's a responsibility to kind of honor that in each person, you know, whether they, you know, who, like, for sure Eureka-centric, you know, Eureka or, you know, the surrounding area, and but to also kind of like be in the struggle and tension and not shy away from it. And, you know, it's not, and I think it's a learning process to try things, to reflect on them, to bring other people into that reflection, and to create change together. So hopefully we can continue to create more opportunities for, you know, joy and care for everyone. But it's also a year of struggle.
Okay, I know that was a big one. So because the book talks a lot about the encampment communities, and within that, there are various stories of broken trust, elements of rupture in people's lives in different ways, right? So in thinking about how the elements of community can come together in an encampment, it's important to think about how trust can make or break a situation, right? And we see that often when there are police interactions at encampment sites. That's one of the first examples that comes to mind for me. But I'd like to hear from anybody who wants to pipe up about this. Was there a moment that you restored trust, or a moment that sticks out where trust was broken? And what do we do about that?
Another complex question.
Yeah.
I guess for me, well, being homeless, we asked the city to account for the money that was allocated for us, and they could not give us the accountability for where all those millions of dollars are going. Still to this day, they still haven't been able to provide that information to us. So that's when it was broken to me.
So about trust issues, got some of those, especially with police, like, and from somebody who's been arrested 39 times in 6 months by the Arcata Police Department, twice by the Eureka Police Department in that same span, for things like possession of a shopping cart, which like ultimately led me to be put on probation. It's as simple as like, not every officer is the same. Like, this is true. Like, it takes one officer to make a bad encounter with somebody to ruin it, basically, for any other officer who might actually be trying to like be positive or engage in a positive way. At this point, I think most of those bridges are burned. So like, it's not ever going to be the police that we can use to intermediate these situations, because we're just adding trauma and we're asking people to have like no experience in helping somebody in such a way to like do these things outside of what police should ever be used for. It's a waste of resources. And it's just perpetuating the problem. So the trust isn't necessarily that all police are bad. It's that it only takes one bad encounter with one police officer for all police officers to be basically look too much alike to be able to differentiate how this person is going to handle the situation. So we need community members, we need professionals, we need resources, like people that are actually there to engage people for the right reasons, to be the ones making these engagements. It should never be the police, like ever. Like there's no reason that the police should ever be there unless there's a dangerous situation. Police need to be there. I don't know who raises their children and be like, call the police, they're the heroes, they'll save the day. Most of the time when somebody does that, somebody ends up in a bad situation. A lot of times it's avoidable. You don't need police to interact with each other. I encourage people to interact with each other and to be able to interact with your neighbors and your community without calling the police for reasons they don't need to be there. So just outside of, if we want to start to build trust, we have to go about this in a way where we don't expect or put on police officers to do things they're not qualified to do, and to put them in situations where they're just, I mean, it's just not going to work. It never will. So it's up to community, like it's up to us as a community to come and intervene in these situations. It's up to us to do cop watch when we see people being engaged with the police, to be somebody there as a witness, to make sure the police are doing their job right. It's important. More than you might know. And that's where I think trust is really gone forever at this point. And we need to engage this in a way where police officers are not the way that we're doing this.
I think, thank you. We've been saying this, AHHA has been saying this for a really long time. Everything that we have essentially centers the police in their approach to our unhoused population. And it's been a scene of erosion for a really long time. For me, as a community member, trust is really important. And I think it goes into community to all of us as members of the community. It's hard to open up and to be willing to know unhoused people if you haven't done that. And one of the things that we had for hopes with our mobile shower program was that we would have people who would be volunteers in the communities where we operate, be meeting and connecting with the people who are in those communities that are not housed. So we have actively unhoused people that are in our program, providing services too, both get and give services. But I think there's got to be ways that are, we have to break down barriers and find some way for all of us all to come together. We have this thing, the second Saturday of every month called the Community Conversation. And we want people to come and participate in that. It's open to the whole community. We want our unhoused community members to come in, but it's really hard for people who have not had an experience to want to put out the effort to come. So we have to welcome and help them get there and do things where we have to show up. We have to show up when they want us to be there too, and they need us to be responsive. So that can be a whole array of things, but if you don't know it, and you're not talking to anybody, and you can't hear that, it doesn't come to you, because you're not getting in the media. So connect with people who can help segue those relationships into actual valuable resource.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is, perspective. A lot of people naturally ask, well, like, if all these things that the government is doing don't seem to be making homelessness better, don't seem to be resolving homelessness, what should be done? And, and which is a very important question, and I spent a lot of time reflecting on in the book. But I think, one answer to that, because of this lack of trust, profound lack of trust, not just with the police, but with local government, is it, I think rather than the government, bringing in massive top-down solutions, which are expensive and don't necessarily work that well, this idea of the urban acupuncture, like small little influxes of resources designed to stimulate things moving in a certain direction. I think that the top-down solutions just don't. Some of them have their place for sure, but like to imagine that that's the whole picture of what is needed, I think is very short-sighted. And I think organizations like AHHA and most communities have these groups that are like mutual aid based groups that really have relationships of trust with unhoused communities to funnel resources to those groups to do more of the work rather than into entities that don't have the trust. And I think because rebuilding that trust is like almost a generational project. Like it's not going to happen next year.
I think that's an important point, and I also think this always happens, and I don't know, I was opening up and being better at this. Trust is a big thing too, because we're not trusted by government. We're not trusted, our organizations are trusted by government. They're highly suspect of us because of what we speak, the messages that we give. And we speak truth, and our truth. But also, at the tables where we have conversations that are about what to do with resources, rarely are our unhoused people present in those conversations. And at every meeting I go to, they should be here. So it's really important.
It's challenging. I'm reflecting my own experience in sitting here, from being outside of government, working in spaces, I would say, more shoulder to shoulder, amongst Nezzie and people addressing homelessness, to then being, getting elected. For sure, addressing homelessness was probably the main reason I ran for city council, was because I was really actively involved with quite a few different causes. There are other reasons, but that was one of the driving factors. But then being inside and maybe I've been reflecting a little on, what will my life be now after this experience? And I do think that there is the capacity to have real person-led relationships with government, or at least, for sure, I'm now super biased, but I do think that there's a space to have a government that isn't top-down, that is democratic, that is like active and from the will of the people. And I think that there's, I'm hopeful to create more opportunities and to participate in more opportunities where we can really think about what are the policies we want and the systems we want, and how do we bring those forward in a meaningful way. And I think it requires a lot of long-term dedication. And deeply appreciate the people in this room who have been involved with causes for a long time. But I think here, more than almost any place, there is some capacity to actually have a responsive government. And I don't think that because I have these experiences, I'm going to seem like, oh, I deserve your trust, or I deserve someone else's trust, right? And I think that all of that is made day by day over time, and that it's really about committing to being in relationship with one another and continuing to work on issues, and to, I would say respectfully call in, or not so respectfully call in, but I think often when people perceive government as the problem, it also takes away a lot of opportunities for change, because whether we like it or not, we are invested invest in resources, large amount of resources in the government. And so I think that's, there is the capacity to build partnerships, and also to, engage with resistance at the same time.
I just wanted to speak on another trust issue that we haven't really talked about, and that's the process.
Right.
The process might be a little bit different for every situation, at least it should be different for every situation and on an individual basis. But the process of going through a program or filling out the paperwork and navigating resources can easily make a person lose faith, trust, or any type of that even being the answer. I deal with it all the time where a person is I've tried that, I've tried housing, I've been on waiting lists, I'm still waiting on that, I'm still there's the process is a lot of the problem, and we need to make the process very simple. Are you a human? Yes or no, not it shouldn't be about pronouns, it shouldn't be about your race, it shouldn't be about your religion or what you believe in. Are you a human being? Do you need things? If we're supposed to be providing them we have this money to provide these things for you, how do we do that without it coming down to anything other than we're just human and need these things? How easy can we make it for that person to obtain these things? Not difficult, how do we make it where it's a failed process where a lot of the people trying this situation are going to fail to go through the entirety of the process to actually get any of the resources. We need to make these processes easier. And we need to rebuild trust in the process that somebody can, because if you see somebody go through the process, that hey, they were out here with me 6 months ago, now look at them, they got a place, they're doing great, they're acting, look at them, wow, that's great. They see that. You don't think they notice that? So it's when they see, oh, I'm trying, and nope, didn't work again. And that's the story, we have to shift the narrative, by the proof is in actually doing this. Having people go through the process, so make the process easier, so that we can see people going through the process. That will naturally bring people through the process with them. But it's the loss of the faith and the trust in the process. For people even try to engage and go down that road, it makes it harder for resources in this process. Because if somebody doesn't have faith, they're not going to put out the effort that it takes to go through it. And if we require too much effort of them, then it's failed. We failed just as much as they did by not putting in the effort, because we should know that the effort is something they can't put into it. Or maybe have the capacity to put into it.
He said your thing. I just was going to add one other thought, which is, policymakers are elected, and I think a big issue is that, people voting for local officials don't have great information, and historically it's the media's job to provide that information, right? And so, as an example, I didn't focus on local government in the book. I literally wanted to shift the focus in a different direction, but I did recently, after the book was published, I reached out to different local government officials in the Bay Area, including the director of housing for the city of San Jose, who has homelessness as part of his portfolio of responsibility. And we met, and he was very cordial, and he was like, I completely agree with everything you're saying, but my hands are tied, is what he told me. And he said, my hands are tied because the elected people, who are his bosses, don't give him the latitude to operate differently. And, the bosses of the elected people are the voting people, right? And so, but unfortunately, the trend, public perception is going in the direction of make the homeless people disappear by any means necessary. That there's three possibilities, like indoors, in a grave, or in a jail. And so I think, we as citizens, and maybe not everybody in this room, but just collectively, when we're demanding of our public officials, because people call the city, and I mean, they like call and call and call, and the sweeps are really pushed by people calling and complaining. Neighbors calling and complaining, being like, get rid of these people.
Squeaky wheel.
But we have to recognize when we're saying that, or even if we're not overtly saying it, when our actions demonstrate that, like really that's a grave, a jail cell, or a house. Like that's where those are the three options of where they could be if they're not camping on the street in your neighborhood.
Well, you just perfectly segued into my next question, so thank you for that. In my own local reporting here locally and interviews I've done, something really sticks out to me, and I try to remember to pose this inquiry to people who are living outdoors, and it's the concept of out of sight, out of mind, right? So I've been told two things. I've been told out of sight, out of mind is not good for anybody. That sort of fosters invisibility, isolation, and neglect for people who are homeless and don't want to be, or for people who just need services, right? Anything. People who are lacking community, right? The other response that I get sometimes is that out of sight, out of mind is sort of one of the few ways that people living homelessness get any peace. And I know that might be confusing for people, but I'm hoping that you can help us understand that.
Yeah, I'm gonna answer the second part of that.
Yeah.
Because I was homeless for 12 years, and it was being shunned from society is the reason why I ended up in the encampment in the first place, because I was people that was like-minded with me, people that was suffering along with me. And it empowered me, it gave me peace. Like you said, I felt like, this is my brother right here. Let me have some bread, man. That's what it did for me.
So, just repeat the first part of the question.
Yeah, one take on
The outside out mind.
Yeah, out of sight, out of mind. The first take I get probably most often, and from people doing mutual aid, from service providers, is it's not good for anybody. That it fosters isolation and it's unhealthy for people, right? To try to disappear people is wrong, they would say. And then the other perspective is, well, that's the only piece I get is when I'm not being scrutinized, essentially. So sometimes being out of sight and out of mind is preferred because then people are able to live the way they are comfortable.
So there's a lot of layers to that. So the out of sight, out of mind approach from the city's perspective, or like city government's perspective, is that if we can keep them away from the NIMBYs, then we won't get complaints as much. So like if people don't have to see it, then they don't engage with us trying to get rid of it. Also, it's an eyesore to the community, as that's the way that they're looking at the situation. So in and of situations like with the encampment, in the example, like in multiple encampments that we have here, it's the police literally saying, okay, well, you guys can go over here for now. It's out of sight, it's out of mind. If you go over here, we won't bother you. It never lasts.
No.
It never lasts.
No.
And so you get these communities started up that are out of sight, out of mind, until, oh, we have a development project that's gonna go there. or, that's actually, and so they, typically it's code enforcement, and like that's how these things come about. It's, if it was out of sight, out of mind, and really not bothering anybody, then it would be up to the city to leave it alone. But no, they come into, who owns this property? All right, well, you gotta do something about this or it's gonna start costing you money. So that's, like, cause they don't actually, as a city, have leverage to come in and remove anybody from something that's not city property. It's not their responsibility. So it becomes their responsibility to put pressure on that person to make this out of sight, out of mind go away. Like, it's still gonna have to exist. Some people don't literally disappear unless they die. They're still, even if they're in jail or housed, they're still there. They still exist. So it's really important that this out of sight, out of mind, realize what perspective we're coming from. Are we coming from the city or the outside community from that community? Well, the outside, out of mind from somebody in that community is privacy. I mean, if I have to live on a sidewalk with people coming back and forth, casting judgment at me every chance I look and getting somebody looking down on me because I'm right here in their vision, then I have no privacy. Like, I don't know, where do I change my clothes? Like, if they take my tent, I don't even have a tent, and I only have a blanket, hopefully, to sleep on. Like, how do I change my clothes? Like, how do I bathe? How do I, like take care of my hygiene? How do I do these basic human things without privacy? So it's privacy. So that there needs to be, I mean, we have doors at our house when we have houses. We have shades on our windows, like for that same reason. Even though we're indoors, we like our privacy at times, or sometimes let's open it up and let's let the neighbors hear our music. You know, but like for the most part, that privacy is something that's a human need. We need that privacy. We need to be able to change our clothes and take care of our hygiene without the whole world being right there to see. So like out of sight, out of mind comes to privacy. A person, there's a basic need for privacy for obvious reasons. And so they need to have privacy, whatever that is or however that looks. But the out of sight, out of mind, that's maybe the only place they can get it. Because they have to hide to do it. That's the thing about that concept. Not having a place to go have your own privacy. Having to find somewhere to hide, have your own privacy. And then knowing that in isolation, if you're hiding somewhere, you might be vulnerable. That's where being in a group or in a community is like, shoot, at least I know that somebody's gonna care if they hear me scream. You know what I mean? Like that's where it comes in. You get people in these communities that become shepherds. You realize, oh, these are the veterans. They stand up right away and they're like, we'll protect everybody here. These are my people. This is why I'm here. A lot of people are like, oh, I can cook. I want to cook for everybody. I love cooking. You know what I mean? You know how people live here. We end up with daycares and everything you could imagine in these situations that develop.
So the real question should be, what do you do with the encampments? And there's so many things that they can do. They can give wraparound services to these communities that are already thriving and, outside out of mind in that way. Give us resources and we'll stay outside out of mind. Give us land and we can be outside out of mind. But without those resources, it's not going to work.
Okay. Nezzie or Leslie, from a policy perspective, from engagement perspective, anything?
Well, sort of. One of the questions that was posed to me recently in the meeting with the Chamber of Commerce was the business district is absolutely exhausted by having people in their doorways and on the streets and having to pick up after them and everything else. Everybody has to live in the community. Everybody deserves to be in the community. How do we do this? What can we do that will make it possible for people to live together? And there are a lot of things that we can do. Seriously, we can provide restrooms, we can provide garbage places, we can provide open spaces, we can provide rest areas, we can provide a lot of different things that we don't now do, rather than just leave people living on the sidewalks. as far as what can be done, existing encampments, how remote they are, or how close in they are, or whatever it is, there's so much that we can do. But it really is about just deciding you want to do it, and then making the leaders appropriate the resources to make that happen. And there are a lot of resources that have been invested in issues around homelessness, particularly in the cities, and the enforcement. If we put the money on the people that we spend on sweeping and code enforcement and all of those things, we would have a vastly different situation. Say that again?
We would still have money left.
Yeah.
Actually.
Okay. I wanna check in.
Can I just add something?
Sure, go ahead.
Like one simple way that we can make it a lot, like one way to start is allowing people safe parking, the right to park in their own space. Like, you know, just the autonomy that if I'm in my own vehicle, I'm not gonna be harassed by the police. My vehicle is gonna be taken from me and I'm not gonna lose all of that. We can just allow people to exist in ways that they already have basic amounts of shelter without taking that. That's a huge situation. People that are car camping or have some sort of shelter, get that taken as soon as possible because of the way that the cities are enforcing car camping. And it could also, these could be our tourists that we're harassing that just came to van camp for a weekend at a beach, you know what I mean? Like, so this pressure that we're putting on people, like, is needless, and like that should be one of the first things that we change, is allow people to just be without like going out of our way to harass them. Like, and I think that's an important first step. And trash and sanitation, if the encampment already exists, what would it be to literally, the amount of funds that go through our cities, to say, oh, we can put a few porta potties in the dumpster there. Simple.
In the same way, this has been going on a long time. And in the amount of time that I've been on the streets with people, I have seen so many vehicles, RVs, destroyed, vehicles taken away. And the really difficult part about that is it's because they aren't registered, or it's because they don't have a working toilet or whatever. We have the ability, the technology, the know-how, to know how to address what people need to be able to achieve stability in the ways that they're living, rather than trying to demand that people live the way that we want them to in order to have access to resources and housing or shelter.
Thank you for that. So another thing that's a prominent concept in the book, one of my favorite things is you talk about the spark, right? And my impression is that it's something, it's not just hope, but it's like an individual's power and their pride. It's almost like this electric, a spark, right? And I've seen that in Humboldt too. I know there's a spark at every encampment, I'm sure of it, at least a few. But the question for the panel, what do we do with the spark? How does a community not waste the spark or energy from the spark, right? And then beyond that, how can the outside community recognize that spark and how can that be used in a proactive way?
Well, first, the spark is like a rebirth. It's energy. It's electrifying. And it's easy to see. When somebody is really destitute, really down low, and he's smiling for something. Something happened in his life to make him smile in his worst moment of his life. You see a makeshift garden coming up in one of the encampments. That's part of the spark. You see housed and unhoused together, bonding, doing great things together. That's evidence of the spark. This spark is life. You know, it's why I'm still here. It's what created me again.
Yeah, Monte is where that phrase came that I mentioned in the book and chose as the title of the film because it, all these policy discussions are so important, but at the end of the day, it's human life and it's the spirits, and that spark is something we actually all have in common, and sometimes life experiences, have a way of revealing or strengthening that spark or bringing it out, between different people. And, one way that I find the spark personally is by connecting with people from really different life experiences than myself. Like that's just something that brings me alive. And that was certainly part of my experience, being in the camps. So that's all I have to say.
I have a really good example. We have some models of things that we would share with people. Like, this is just an idea. But if you were going to have to come together in a space, do you know who you want to live with? And they all do, because they have their community, they have the people that they care about and that they want to support and to support them. So we have these models of tiny house village and sanctuary camp and those kinds of things, or safe parking to start out with. But when we had community conversations for 2.5 years with the people that were in camp in Eureka. And they would come and every month we'd sit down and we'd talk about, well, here's how would you like to live here? And if you have a conflict, if this happened, how would you resolve that? We had some great conversations, but the best conversation we ever had was we were having the graduate engineers from HSU work with us on designing one of the tiny houses to be the most energy efficient, sustainable, affordable, all of those things. And they said it was theoretical because we didn't have a building where we could actually do this, but we were building a house that they were working on. And I said, well, look, let's get together. We don't want to do something that people that want to use, or we don't want to do it if people aren't going to start work. So I said, well, let's just all get together. So we got a bunch of people who were out in the camp to come meet with us. And I told them, I said, bring your creativity and your devices, whatever. And they did too. And they sat down and they started talking about, I watched people create right out of nothing. It's just so creative, so much energy out there, so many sparks. And when they got together, they just were sparking off of each other. Like, have you ever tried this? Yeah, what happens when you, and it was just like for 2 hours of this incredible conversation. And everybody was so enriched by it. And it really was a wonderful experience. But it takes getting together to utilize that spark.
I'd like to kind of give an example of how I feel that spark exists within all of us. We just kind of lose it, or it reignites. It's like it is an ember, or it's a flame, based on where you're at the time. So I think that we all have a light. Sometimes it's smoldering, sometimes it gets ignited. You just breathe into it, it's fire. I would just like to say that I've traveled all over the world. I've been blessed in the way that I've been able to travel and experience a lot of different cultures and communities all over the world. And one thing that I've kind of always found interesting in my own, we all perceive things differently, but some of the most talented, truly talented and amazing artists and musicians are on the street. They're almost starving artists is a thing. It's been a thing since art's been a thing, probably. And the most talented people that are musicians, poets, some of the poetry I've heard from, I've seen people you would think this person just roll out of the bush could possibly jump on a piano and play Mozart. You don't know the background of these people. You really don't until you actually engage with them. You'll find that some of them are the most talented and just beautiful, blessed people in ways that will never feed them. Being an artist, being super talented, being a musician, being super talented doesn't ever mean that that's going to be your way into anything. That's still who you are. And I find that we all are talented and have all these different Oh, and we probably would do a lot better if we got rid of some of the corrupt government officials. I'm not gonna name names, or I told that they wouldn't fire shots. We know who they are.
First, I just want to shout out to Zora Neale Hurston's book, Their Eyes Are Watching God, which just has an incredible passage about the spark of humanity, and I just want to honor her and Juneteenth, lift up her work. If you haven't read it, give it a read. And then also Gabby and Caroline from Our Space for, I feel like the work that y'all are doing with supporting artists, which is so amazing, and in terms of really nurturing that spark. So thank you, and of course to all the artists and other people who are making art. It's not alive if people don't show up and come make art. So thank you for that. And just earlier, I didn't speak about the idea of privacy, but everyone reserves privacy. I think we should continue to work on a safe parking space. So let's talk about it. It's come up. We've talked about it. I don't think there's not a no, but we haven't gotten there yet. So I just want to say I think there's ongoing conversations to be had. And there is no tension over the commons. And that tension is something that is something that's systemic in nature, in just terms of like the consolidation of wealth, and that we're now, fighting for what we imagine living a good life to be, and people have different senses of what that is, and it creates a lot of tension on our streets and in our communities, and not to say that the global injustices sort of write us a pass, from the work we do here, but that I think there's a lot more opportunity to come together in terms of addressing that. But also just that there is a real tension that exists in terms of just, and I thought, this isn't totally on me, but Portland Live 24-hour bathroom is coming back before City Council sometime. So we can show up and support for such a thing. We can put into it, in terms of spark. I love what you said that we all have it, and I think there's so many false narratives around people on the street that sort of people see these stories and cliches and don't actually see the people. And also there are times in which the street and the instability and the turmoil and the fear also can take away someone's spark. I definitely have had friends who have deeply struggled with the instability of being unhoused and have, experienced pain and suffering, not inherently through being unhoused, but through the larger conditions around it. And if there were sort of quick answers, I think we would have done them already. I think we would have. And I think Nezzie, you bring up a really good point of how do we get more voices in positions, in these conversations that are, around positions of power, and I think that's something that we can and should continue to work on in terms of really acknowledging the power of lived experience.
That's really being acknowledged, the brain trust that's there, and all of the capability that we're talking about doesn't ever be brought to the table to be acknowledged for what happens, or rarely that rarely happens. And so I hope we work on that. I hope we do that a lot, and I hope for everybody who's interested in being part of the conversations, they will come to the community conversations we have on the second Saturday every month at the Labor Conference, because it's open to everybody. And it takes a commitment to do that. It's ongoing. So we can't make it every time, but we should make it some of the time so that we can keep the conversation going.
Speaking of that, should we
Okay, yes, we do want to transition to questions from the audience. If anybody has thoughts, I just want to plant a seed here because I had one last question, really two last questions, but I'll only plant one seed now. So as we transition to audience questions, just want you guys to think about, the spectrum of needs inside any encampment is as diverse as any spectrum of needs in any neighborhood, right? So what does it look like to build that vision on the ground? If we put people in charge of their own destiny and their own situation, what does that really look like? And with that, let's do some questions from the audience. Thank you so much.
I have lived unhoused before for a short period of time in my life, and it was a car camping situation where I had to be really conscientious and careful of the people around me so that I could stay safe and relatively unseen and private for my safety. And I have family members who are suffering with mental disabilities and unhoused and have been for most of my life. And I worry for their safety too, but also I think something that should be brought to the table is the safety of housed people as well. There is a certain aspect of fear and trust from the other side of distrust for the safety of the other side too, and how we can work on building that up too. Where's the accountability in those communities where people, being respectful of everybody else's needs, not to be causing a ruckus or making yourself a nuisance to other people. I have that responsibility as a person, and I think everybody should respect that responsibility. So, what does accountability look like in this situation to you?
So in our encampment, first let me say, as homeless people, we're trying to be invisible. And say that first. So we don't want the garbage out there. We don't want the needles out there. We don't want anything that's a blemish upon us. Do we want there? In our encampment, we try to pay for trash services because there were some of us that are higher functioning than the other ones. And so we had money, we had jobs, and we were denying those things. But I do agree with you wholeheartedly that the garbage and the safe conditions could considerably be changed. It's always been a battle for us in our encampment to try to keep it clean. And it was, trust me, it was an everyday thing. I was out there with the push broom every day, trying to get the house neighbors to come in. We wanted it to be inviting for them so that they could see that we're normal people. And I also believe that communication, like these meeting rooms that we're in, like right now, are the catalyst of bridging those two gaps.
Dialogue, I think, is the most important thing, is face-to-face communication, because it's so easy to other people if you're not talking with them, and it's so easy to deny people's humanity if you're not relating to them. And I think that happens, it's so easy, I think we all do it to a certain extent, but just the more we can just, move aside judgments and whatever notions, just talk to people. People who look different or seem different or scary,
I think it's important to point out that, like, it's a human condition, like, we're all human, and, like, whether you're housed or not, I mean, how many people, yourself included, I'm not speaking for anybody else, but I am saying that, like, we all have our struggles, like, mental health is a very real struggle, addiction is a very real struggle, which is a mental health issue, by the way, and so, just, you could be a millionaire, you could have lots of problems, be depressed and struggle, kill yourself, and like all these things. Like, just imagine having whatever problems you have as a person that's housed, now try to deal with that with all of the survival that you would have to deal with on top of it. So it doesn't change. It's not different issues that people are dealing with. And they're not different people. They're just, you just have to add survival to whatever a regular person might be dealing with. Like, and it's going to be the same issue across the board.
There was one thing that you said in your book that, I don't know, just thought about it an awful lot. And it was a real simple statement. How many of you ever had trauma that you haven't been able to recover from? And that's a perspective that we sort of just look past. Because people that are unhoused are traumatized and re-traumatized, especially for sleeping, over and over and over again. So there's no getting out of it.
It's surprising how many common grounds you find when you start that engagement. You can find so many kindred people.
What was your advice for following this evening?
Hi, thank you all for being here. My first question is speaking of common grounds, what are some things that we can be doing to engage in common ground between myriad of communities that are not necessarily about resources and services, but are just a level playing field to see, I'm just like you, you're just like me, this is how we're all human, and we can be together, safely together, and we don't have to be so ostracizing and afraid of each other. And another thought that eats at my brain, and I just cannot figure this one out for the life of me, is so I personally have lived in my car for the last 6 years, and I love it. It has been a choice. It is my choice of lifestyle, and a social aspect that I have encountered countless times is if I tell another person that I live in my car and I have for the last 6 years, the instant reaction is, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm really praying you find somewhere soon. Have you been on this list? But if I tell someone, oh, I live in my van, and I have for the last 6 years, all of a sudden that's so cool. How do you do it? I would love to do that. Where does this disconnect come from? Why is that a thing in people's minds? What happened?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. That I reflected a lot on that because I wrote in the book how when I was 21 years old or something like that, and a college student, I chose to live in the woods on campus under a tarp just because it reflected my values. I was into just simple living and a spiritual lifestyle. And there were lots of students living in the woods at UCSC, and there was sort of a spectrum of choice and necessity among that population, and I was definitely on the choice side. But there have always been nomadic populations, and we have often celebrated and embraced those historically. I did a lot of research about the history of homelessness, and for example, 100 years ago in this country, the hobos, and the tramps were vilified on one hand, but they're actually also celebrated on the other hand, romanticized, and historically back, in Europe, anyways, there was this history of traveling musicians and things like that, and the Roma people, and all these different kind of subcultures of people that just don't fit in with our kind of current way of living and working. And I think that should be celebrated and not maligned, and much less criminalized. And yeah, I just also want to speak to your question. I think that's the crux, really, of the whole observe behaviors that are frightening to us, and we hear things like, about crime and things like that, and these are real valid, human concerns, and there is no, just to ask those communities for greater accountability, I think is not necessarily a constructive framing. I think, a constructive framing, and I don't want to, constructive is not the right word, pragmatic. I think that the most pragmatic approach is to not be like, you guys behave differently, right? Like, but to see what kinds of things could foster a different outcome, in the long term, and have some patience and some tolerance for that, as opposed to, house folks and government people, doing things that don't foster those outcomes, because unfortunately that's a lot of what we see. So for, an example, things that foster that are relationships, engaging, like getting to know people, and, just things organically come through that, I find, as opposed to like, you better not do this. For example, on Wood Street, it's widely known in the city of Oakland that there was like a chop shop on Wood Street. The stolen cars, that's where they got them, down Wood Street. They get cut up and sold, and it's a whole enterprise. And like that's super complicated. Like there's so many elements to that. It's like, one, you have house people, leading those criminal enterprises, but relying on unhoused people to do a lot of the dirty work. And those unhoused people, that's part of their sustenance, is to do that, dirty work. And so how do you solve that? Man, it is like, it's so difficult. But the one thing that I saw, that helped is like, you had, and Monte can speak to this, much better, but like, you had the people on Wood Street who were not doing that, right? And through osmosis, there was, but it was one community. You had the people who were engaged in that, you had the people that were not. But they were all one community. They weren't judging each other. But there was an invitation, an implicit, unspoken invitation to like, you guys, like, maybe there's something else you could do, And the more that energy grew, which I saw it grow dramatically over the course of several years, the more those, downsides, if you want to call it that, can be mitigated. And so, those communities that form side by side with the drug dealing and the, criminal, the stealing of cars and all that, like, it's like, foster the ones that aren't encouraging that, because you can't really just be like, stop it, you guys, don't, because that's that guy's living, that's how he's making his living, so until you can show him some other way to make a living.
Yeah, so like on Wood Street, there was a front street, Wood Street, and then there was a back part of Wood Street. The back part is where most of the bad elements of the things would happen. In the front part, it was you had expectations. We gave you expectations on the little lot that we were on to stop that element from coming on the front part of the area. That's just a little, FYI, how we did that. But I wanted to answer your question. You wanted to know what can you do to bridge the gap. I get it, trust me. I was afraid to go into the encampment myself, and I needed that encampment to live. I needed a place to be. But what you can do is you can reach out to the local boots on the ground organizations that are going to these encampments already because they've built relationships. Excuse me. They've built relationships with these individuals already, and go volunteer some time. You can do that. You can go there and just ask them what they might need. Maybe bring garbage bags to them. Something simple. You have to start the engagement. It just has to be created. And the second thing, the third thing is you can go and advocate for the homeless individuals. We look at everything. We see that, hey, this lady's house, and she's in the city council talking about, give us those rights back. Yeah, give us those rights back. So, there's plenty of things that can be done. What should be done is leave it rest right there. What should we do? And it's us and them situation. It's not, we're all the same. If I was to take away your garbage, your power, you probably have campfires in your backyard. You probably have a pile of garbage all throughout your house. Probably couldn't see your house. So we're all the same. We don't have walls and barriers and borders that we can hide behind.
Could I answer that question? So a layer of that came to my mind is that what part of that conversation would include people who are unhoused but are in so much shame of it for fear of being, retaliation and enforcement and things like that, that they won't admit to being unhoused. They've found great ways to hide it.
Well, what are you asking? If how do they get services? How do they get help?
Say, for example, if I went into a Starbucks and I don't have the money to pay for a coffee, but I'm wearing nice enough clothes and my bag's not all torn up, I look like any other housed person that comes in there. They're not going to bother me about it. And so, how would housed communities engage with people who've learned how to hide it well? And when people who've learned how to hide it well out of shame, then how do we bridge that gap?
I believe that still starts with communication. How dare us walk past anything that's alive? I don't care if it's a tree, and don't feel that energy from that item, from that entity, because we all have energy, and it starts with hello. How are you doing?
One more question, I guess.
So as far as hiding in plain sight or playing housing, you might call it, I feel like, we all are kind of playing a character in some way publicly. It's a projection of what we want or the way we want the world to see us. I feel like you say the communication is really important, but in and of that act of hiding in plain sight, trying to pass yourself off as something that's the stigma has gotten to you to the point where you have even internalized it. If that makes sense. Yeah. So the fear of belonging to a group that you don't identify with, has caused, that stigma has then caused you to act accordingly, or try to pretend to be safe. I don't want to look unhoused, so I can pass off as housed. Maybe that might in some situations make it easier to navigate, like you say, you're not feeling the same judgment because your bag's not ripped or your clothes are shitty. But in reality, that's the stigma that's gotten so far that it's been internalized. The way that you I would just say realize that's the stigma, and try to break that yourself so that you can feel comfortable engaging from a place of honesty, where you don't have to feel like you're playing a part or pretending to be something. Because like the more you engage with people through honesty, like, yeah, I love my car, and then they connect with you and they're like, wow, this is a really great person that lives in their car. You change that person's mind through your example. Like being an example of what it could be is like the best way to, like, leading by example. So like being an example, you know, like you'd be surprised at how many ways you can lead people just by example. Like if somebody has an engagement with somebody that's positive, and they're like, oh wow, like that opens up their mind to like, oh, maybe somebody living in their car isn't a guy that I can't trust around my kids or something. Maybe they see you at the park and their kids love you and they're like, oh yeah, I live in my car. Like, wow, shoot, my kids are safe around these people. You know what I mean? Like it's, don't exclude yourself. Don't let the stigma come and like, and don't internalize it. Because like the more we perpetuate the stigma, the harder it is for us to bridge these gaps and communicate with each other. And just remember, be a good example. That's all you can do.
An awful lot of people, which is why we have the programs we do that have the institutional models of things, believe that everyone has to have a house. Everyone needs to be in a house. Everybody needs to be in a house. But everybody doesn't need to be in a house. And I've traveled with it myself, and I've been to other countries where there's no law enforcement about people who are, at the end of the day, on their way back to wherever they came from, and they get tired and they throw their Lido over a tree and put a rock on the other end of it, and that's their shelter for the night, or something. We don't allow for any of that here, and it's some of it's circumstances, some of it's stress, some of it's lifestyle, but we really think that we need to bust that open to where there should be other alternatives for people to live comfortably. And this is at the highest levels, you know. HUD has its rules and how money should be spent. The state has its rules. Housing and community development says how this could go and how that could go. And so options are not available. Alternatives are not available because they won't allow resources, funding to go in that direction. So it comes largely from community when these things happen, which is why community is so vital and important. But we really need to shake that tree and break up some of that stuff so that we can have a more qualitative life for everybody.
You want another question?
Thank you all for your perspectives in this conversation. One thing that I'm hearing a lot is about how like systems are broken and this is what we need to do to fix them, right? Like, more resources, more bathrooms, parking, this kind of thing. But my question is about more like, and this is my perspective, that the systems aren't broken, but they're working exactly how they're intended to. And you know, this thought of like, you're either in a grave, you're in a jail, or you're, what was the third one? House, right? I think that the systems that are working exactly how they want the unhoused people in a grave. And I'm wondering, in the conditions that we're living in right now, with rising authoritarianism and fascism, what do we do? Like, what do we do? I mean, I'm hearing a lot about community, and I think that's so important. And I'm wondering if you each want to talk a little bit about that, of like, how we can work outside the system to facilitate community and safety.
All right. Well, I think you're right. There's been a lot of design in the system to be what it is. It's not that somebody forgot somewhere along the way that it's difficult and it doesn't need to be difficult or overly difficult. So yeah, I think you're right on that it's not a broken system as much as by design it's flawed. What was the point I was trying to make? So the anarchist in me and like the activist in me wants to go outside of like if we could just do this without the government, it'd be great. It's the only way to make progress is to have that support as well. If you look in places where they have tiny home villages, where they have we can easily say 10 to 20 steps ahead of what we're doing here, it's been the community support from all levels of the community saying, we have to make this happen, we have to do something, and making it actionable, and it's literally been the community support that's made that happen. So it's through community that these things happen, in every case. And it's been with support of the government, but it's been because the government has been forced by the people. We will not tolerate you not having this happen. And the amount of protests, the amount of community action, shutting down things and making it to where we won't let you go to work until you start dealing with this. If you got to the point in Eugene where they literally were until you deal with this issue alone, we won't let you have your council meetings. We won't let you have your government to deal with shit that we don't want you to deal with. This is what we want you to deal with now. And as a community, they stood up and they said, look, this is what we're doing. And they made it. They forced it, but as a community. And it was with the support of the government. So I don't think that you can do it outside of it. I don't think that we have to work with it, not against it.
There's other agencies like Homefulness that actually does operate without the government at all. They have Security Trust that they have an agreement that those people, they built an apartment building by themselves without any state, federal, or government funds. These entities do exist. It is possible, and that's just a few of the ideas that I've come to across my mind.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a tension there. I think both are important. I mean, my focus is what can communities do? Not waiting on the government, first of all. But the government exists and has to be engaged with, and I think and maybe this is naive and wishful thinking, but I like to think if communities are doing things that work well, that the government might be oh, let's incentivize that. But I recognize that there are reasons that does not always happen, but sometimes it does happen. And in Portland, they have Dignity Village, which is a community of unhoused people that design and manage and govern their own community, but they're doing it on city land. The city doesn't provide them any resources other than the land, which is the critical resource. And it's been happening for 25 years in Portland. The city government's not really embraced it, but they also haven't ended it. And so I'm currently working on a story about what's going on in Portland, and there's a lot of people in the city council that are we're spending $40,000 per bed on these government-run tiny home villages, and Dignity Village spends $40,000 per year. Dignity Village spends $1,000 per year of their own money that they generate on site, not taxpayer money. And so the city council was government should be invested in that, just from an economic perspective, and but you have other city councilors there who are no, we can't give all the control to the people because we're in control, and that is the basis of government, right? They're supposed to protect order, restore order, and things like that. I mean, that's the idea that government has about itself, But I think there is tension, being in these communities, kind of turned me into an anarchist because I saw the power of self-governance, it's just really incredible, and it's so inspiring. Bureaucracies are bureaucracies, and they have their role, but they move slow and messy.
When you talk about systems, delayed and care. And I think that, I mean, it's oh geez, I'm like the agent of government or something, right? Which, fair enough, like I signed myself up, but also I did sign myself up to be that in some way in this community, and I take it seriously. So I'm not gonna like take it off when I'm sitting here, right? Like I take that role seriously with as much responsibility as possible. And it exists like as an attention to my body for sure. But I also think that like there's a harm in overgeneralizing about systems and about the ways that they push us down or create power over us. Because I do think we have the capacity to create our own systems, and sometimes with people in government or with parts of government or with like departments in government, sometimes without. There's certainly so much work that happens outside of government, and like government is the consolidation of tax money, to support people who all live in a place. That's really like what it is, and there's a lot of like processes that we've inherited that are built on racism, built on systemic injustice, built on capitalism, but also like it is capable of change and being a place of change. And for sure, it moves slowly. Like for sure, it moves slowly. And I think that the more we also I think take this as like these conversations outside of it's government against people who are unhoused or vice versa, and that it's like we're all like there's a lot of people who are like in between these spaces. They're just like average Joe and Joanne citizen, right? And I think that we have to really think about that we have to take the weight of this conversation and kind of like build bridges at all levels in order to enact meaningful and long-term change. Because if it sort of like becomes this barrier in which like we all sort of vacate government, right, to the people who seriously are fascist, like then we also have a problem because there's still a huge amount of resource in those spaces. And so I think we have to also be engaging with those spaces as like meaningful areas of change.
We don't necessarily need government support as much as we need them to stay out of our like things that are happening too at times. So it's not just the control, like nobody wants to be controlled, I don't think. It's like I think we want our freedom, I think we inherently like don't want to feel governed or lorded over. So I think it's if the government, whether locally or on a macro scale, can't support things that are happening in a community, I think it's the government's should know when to stay out of things and not like hold things back because of the red tape and the process of it being slow. If something can happen without that being slowed down or hindered by local or other governments, I think that's important. That we should be allowed to do these things without interference from our
I think it comes back to the trust issue. Really, for me, that's what it is. Because there have been lots of good examples, lots of good proposals, lots of things that have been put forward. But here's what I framed it when we were in the planning department for a lot of the public policies we worked on. The government's role, the planning commission's role, the supervisors, and the leadership, is to create policy. And what we're trying to do is create community. And those don't work a lot of the time together. And so the idea of government staying out of what you want to do is not really very likely if you want to do something that's in the confines of the city limit, for example. They're going to want to control what you're doing. And even if it's on private property, we've been told we cannot do any of these things unless it is on private property. So that puts another layer of stuff in terms of permitting what you can do on property and so forth. But I guess the point is, there isn't really a lot of option to just trust and let something happen that you can't control, or don't, to step away from control.
Yeah, I think we gotta ask ourselves, like, why is it so, I'm the person talking about. Someone's looking at the microphone a little bit about education. I think we gotta ask ourselves, like, shouldn't be the case. You know, we have a right to things simply because we need them. And, you know, capitalism, racial capitalism, these systems of oppression, they need homelessness to exist as a form of labor discipline. Like, there's, you know, the difficulties of living on the street, the trauma of it all, the administration of it, so much of that is the product of state violence. And that is because it is the system of coercion that capitalism like depends upon in order to keep people going to freaking work. And you know, we're talking about distinction between kind of like self-governed grassroots initiatives and things like that, and working within city council governments. Things are extremely dire here locally right now. You know, they're dire everywhere, but I feel like that needs to be said within a local context. And so much of it has to do with the fact that there seems to be a consensus in our local city governments, as is the case, you know, pretty much everywhere in government, I think, within the United States, that like the tourism is a good thing, and how we bring tourism when we displace people, we kick them out of their homes every single day. You know, Humboldt is like a depressed Rust Belt economy, cannabis industry is collapsed, logging is kind of like a shell of what it once was. You know, it's entirely eradicating what is left of the very like small portion of what's really, really beautiful forest. But I'm rambling. But anyways, the point is like the city of Arcata is contracting, I think it's like an $80,000 contract with Civic Engagement, which is the consulting firm which laid the legal framework for Johnson v. Grants Pass. You know, they laid the legal framework to make it legal to lock someone up in a cell, in a cage, or lock them down on the sidewalk. So many of my friends have been kicked out of their homes because the city of Arcata wants a more quote cohesive community and is trying to gentrify Arcata through the gateway wing. Like the 40, the back 40, these are these fields kind of on the outskirts of town, which are extremely heavily polluted by old logging practices. And for a long time, about 20 years, they are like a relatively stable place for people to be. Those places, they were evicted about 4 months ago now. It's because the city wants to build, you know, high-rises there and turn those areas into parks. So we have to think about like what are the actual motivations of the government here, right? And it's to bring tourism, it's to resuscitate a depressed economy. And what does that mean for all of us? It means state violence. It means displacing people, erasing people, taking people out of their homes, leaving disabled elderly women who cannot walk to sit on the sidewalk because the bus that they were in was stopped. So this is something that happened like 3 days ago in Arcata. But yeah, every time this week happens, it's a threat to every single one of us. It's a way of saying that if you don't go to work, you don't sell your time in order to make money, in order to buy a house. Because we lived up in this fucked up system of like having commodification, and this is what's going to happen to you.
Okay, first of all, I say what an extraordinary conversation. I'm so grateful. And but I also want to say, I think the question we have to have in our mind, given there's so much wisdom here and so much life experience, what do all of you think we need to do to maximize this conversation to the utmost degree? So that together, what ways can we come together to make it a reality, the kind of living situation that you described? And I just have to put in a picture, I would be on, that I've been a witness to what AHHA has done, and Nezzie isn't sort of, what people don't realize, I think, is that, yeah, she doesn't want me to talk about it. But really, they have gone to government and changed public policy so that now there is a tiny home village ordinance that allows for a tiny home, and we have it on record in video, said that it, Ford said that it allows for the tiny home village similar to Opportunity Village. But the question becomes, what does it take to make that happen? And I think we have it in us, but we don't know that. And I think we have to call upon the Minnesota strong, approach. And so I think that, what would that take? And I think really a beginning is to go to an AHHA meeting because they have had a track record of changing policy. And in terms of your description of encampments, Andrew Heben went and visited in a similar manner that you did, and he identified the dynamics, the approaches, the relationships, and incorporated them into Opportunity Village. So it might not be all that you would want, maybe it's more formal than you might want, but we have that potential. And I think it would be tragic if we didn't find a way to come together and move forward and maximize the dreams and reality. And I just have to put in, Cal Matters has said that living outside is a slow death sentence. And routinely, we get the coroner's log going for 2025. The average age of death of people outside was 44.9 years. And when you take the life expectancy, which partnership identified 77.2 years, it means that the average number of years that people lose through homelessness is 32.3 years. And I have found public officials don't want to hear it, they don't want to look at it. And so just in summary, I want to say that unfortunately, I think the public narrative is really forceful, saying that if you want a place, there is shelter. The statistics deny that because the point in time, the most recent verified ones, said that there were 1,194 people living outside in conditions not fit for human habitation. And there are 379 sheltered. So in other words, the reality is we need something alternative, and we have the vision, and we have the talk, and we have the insight. But what I think AHHA has done habitually is they have to take that vision and translate it into a reality. So I'm just making a pitch. I hope you'll go to those meetings, and together we can change the world that we're living in. And I guess my question is, how do you think we can come together and make these things happen and not go beyond the discussion?
I agree with you. Town hall meetings, the AHHA meetings, the town hall meetings, the AHHA meetings, any meeting that you can go to that this conversation can continue. That the power is in numbers, not the other way around. I'm not going to talk about numbers because as far as numbers go, the people that are dying are people like me, and so I don't really want to get into the numbers because that'll hurt me right now.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their own area of, resources to do something, right? Like each person can go at it in a different way. For me personally, as a journalist, it's writing books and making films and that sort of thing. But also, I just will give a little. I'll use my moment here to make a plug. But and tell a small story at the same time. But my wife and I have property here in Humboldt County, and one of the ideas that we have with that property is sharing it with the community, including the unhoused community, because land is a tremendous resource, and I said this publicly in the media a few months ago, and particularly in relationship to maybe unhoused folks could in some way benefit from having access to this land. I'll just make it simple. And there was this incredible backlash. This whole thing that happened on Facebook that I didn't even find out about until a couple months later when I got a letter from County Code Compliance saying, well, what's this homeless shelter that you're building out there? And I said, what are you talking about? Like, there's no, doesn't exist, we're just doing some gardening here. And, but it turned out, just hundreds of people, like it was this viral Facebook post accusing us of like, you know, helping the homeless. And, you know, like it was all like, you know, go back to the big city and take your homeless people with you and stuff like that. And just the hysteria, literally just from uttering that word and suggesting that, you know, unhoused people could access land that they weren't currently accessing. It was just, and I should have known. I mean, it shouldn't be that surprising, but like, you know, it makes me want to, you know, say that word more, you know, and talk to those people who went crazy on Facebook and be like, hey, like, I'm not sure what you're envisioning in your mind, but like here's the reality, you know, and it's not so scary, you know, it's like you just invent these demons sometimes, and so, you know, I think it's really important to talk to the people who are afraid, you know, because it ultimately is fear, and to not really judge them either, you know, to not talk down to them, but to talk level with them and be like, hey, like, here's my experience, here's what I know to be true, and what do you think? And like, how can we, you know, like have some common ground here? And so like, you know, I had to call my county supervisor, who was like the one, you know, instigating this code complaint, and be like, why didn't you just like call me out? Like, you know, like my contact information is publicly available. Like, why did you go to county code enforcement rather than just talk to me, and we would have found out, no, we're not building a homeless shelter there. So, and my plug is that next weekend we're inviting the whole community, whether housed or unhoused, it doesn't really matter, to our place for the first time. It's a garden that we've been building outside of Ferndale. We call it Lost Coast Gardens. And something we've been working towards for a year is to be able to get to that point where we can invite the community in. So there's some flyers out there on the table if you want to come. Going to be all sorts of great local music and food and just hanging out. Also, no, it's way past the time that we were going to. So should we maybe one more, and then Jerry is going to close with a poem.
Well, I just would like to say that this has really been, everything that has been mentioned tonight is really everything that I have encountered. I did a documentary series a few years ago called Homeless and Humboldt. A lot of you may have heard of it. It's on YouTube, and I just wanted to say, among other things, that, you know, I came from an area in the Bay Area where homelessness was, I came from Burlingame, where homelessness is shoved off to the side. Like you just don't see it. And so coming here, I just want to say, was quite a culture shock. But what I've come to realize is not only are these unhoused folks really incredible individuals, but like you said, like you guys said, but also that they are a part of the community. They are not below us, even if that's what the message is being forced to us. I just really do. So I agree with all of you in recognizing the value of unhoused folks, no matter what form it takes. I guess my question is, what do you say about the folks who, you know, there's a number of folks, I would think dozens, maybe, you know, hundreds of people that live in the Arcata community forests, either by choice or whatever. I guess, what do you think about those people? I mean, not to say that they're any different than, or they're worse than someone who's living behind the Bayshore Mall, but like, there's kind of a nuance there. I'm just curious, like, what your thoughts on how to treat them, what to think about them, or, you know, just stuff like that. Yeah, that'd be my question.
like people.
Yeah, I think it's like.
This is the thing too, like, it's hard to be making a blanket statement about anything, or to be a voice that's supposed to tell people how people think or feel, whatever. I can really speak from my own experience, and I have encountered people in the community forest in Arcadia, on different occasions. And I found that there's a huge spectrum, a very broad spectrum of people that are there, from kids that are traveling doing house concerts to people that want to be hermits that never see anybody else. So I would say if you have fear or something that keeps you from interacting with them, then bring someone with you. Or if you think something's very dangerous, then don't broach that. But I think it's really important that we all just kind of work with what we have. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it's a huge variation of people. Just like people in houses, people unhoused have a huge variation too. And I know we have to wrap this up. I wonder if we would even have just a moment for each person to just close their.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'll start by closing my thing, and then I'll pass it on. Thank you all for coming. I think it's really important that we have this conversation and we keep it going. We're having a conversation at the community level with folks that are in-house too. I'd like to merge that into something where we can all participate. We, as a completely voluntary organization, we're all volunteers. We have one person we pay, that's our driver for the caravan. But we need volunteers in order to do these things and create meetings and hold space and have people come and bring food and do different things. We need people to participate who want to do that. So if you want to volunteer, go online, fill out a form, let us know that that's what you want to do, we'll follow. We have other activities. We have a quarterly housing forum, and we have the monthly meetings. We also have all kinds of other things like the caravan and the direct services or outreach. So, but we need help with the admin stuff, writing grants, because we do that with local foundations and so on. Anyway.
How can they reach you?
What?
How can they reach you?
Oh, you can reach us by, there's our table right here, there's cards, business cards with the number on it, there's also brochures. It's really easy, it's just AHHA, AHHA, -homeco.org, and that's it. So, thank you all for coming, appreciate it.
I'd just like to thank everybody for being here and taking the time to come out and join us for this. We all have other things going on in life. It takes sacrifice, first sacrifice is our time to get together. So thanks for being here and a part of this, and I look forward to seeing you guys at more community engagements in the future.
It's been a treat to converse with you all and such thoughtful, informed people, experienced people. What I'm thinking about right now is that, I am definitely kind of an opportunist when it comes to resources. I do believe in what are the resources that are available, whether they're in government, whether they're in the bodies of people with lived experience, and let's get together and share them to address what is possible to address. Acknowledging that sometimes we all have to also work in other spaces, but when we can harness resources, I really think the housing that's getting built in Eureka. I acknowledge that it's part, there's some really big developer systems around that housing too, and also this is 300 more units than we're going to have, after 10 years than we didn't have before of low income, very affordable housing. That will allow people to save money. Again, it's not the only solution, nor should it be, but that let's not leave resources out of the picture if they're there, but then also let's acknowledge the gems of resources that are in the bodies and people in our community who have experiences that we may or may not share.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming, and come visit us next weekend, we can talk more. Next Sunday, June 28th, we're having the grand opening of the Los Angeles Gardens from 12 to 4. And the other small plug I'll make, so we've been doing these discussions all over the country. This is like the 23rd event we've done with folks from Wood Street Commons. There's usually 3, only Monte can come today, but we have a GoFundMe campaign going to cover the travel expenses for the folks from Wood Street Commons to make this possible. So there's a QR code if you're able to please contribute, and hope to see you around.
I would just say engage both individuals and sweet skills. That's my motto.
Thank you for that. Everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for engaging. Please keep these issues and these thoughts in your mind as you go around your day, go through the community, attend events, talk to people, spread that spark, respect the spark, and small plug also on my end. If you're curious to see interviews that we've conducted locally, you can find those at Humboldt Freelance Reporting on YouTube. Okay, and that's all I've got.
Jerry, come on up. For those of you that don't know Jerry, he's a venerable poet and a wonderful long-term member of the community who's amazing.
Thank you, Nezzie. Thank you for bringing us all together. This poem comes from the edge of the bay, beyond the edge of the bay, Elder Step, or big sorry, a little sliver of land. You push to the edge, beyond the edge, where we have this problem. Belongings. At the end of the land, there's a spring. A homeless guy lived there, beside a pond, between Elk River and Humboldt Bay. He had a cat. 10,000 years ago, the ice still melting, the ocean still miles away. Legend says the spring was already here. Then in a great earthquake, it sank and was covered by the bay. Now it comes up through this narrow spit of ocean sand and the mud of a century and a half of logging. It's no Walden pond. The stones throw wide, fringed by cattail, willow, myrtle. Frogs, raccoons, and summer blackbirds also shelter here. Jimmy toughed it out for a couple of years, cut back willows with an axe, shoveled sand against the December tides. In a battered aluminum boat, he ferried Eureka's cast-off treasure to his little outpost. An American flag flying from the big black pipe that vents the city's sewage outfall into the bay. Home is the place we keep our belongings. He lived in a Kmart tent on the sinking sand beside a freshwater pond, floating on a rising sea. Folks tried to help him, showed him woodcraft, how to smoke the perch he caught. Someone even tried to rescue his cat, meowing in the willows. Messages in chalk began appearing on the paved waterfront trail. Do not take cat. Cat, not homeless. the cat disappeared again and didn't come back, he got 2 pit bulls that mauled some dog walkers and had to be put down. This brought him to the attention of the authorities. And then he was gone, taken care of. Car batteries, tons of trash remained, the flag in the southerly breeze. Eventually, people cleaned it up. Rangers, beach walkers, a new homeless guy named Tex. Maybe this redeemed a little, or failure to do for the man what the man tried to do for a cat. It will take time